today we're going to be covering root cause analysis. And for many of you on the call, I imagine you're experts in your field, and root cause analysis is something that you've done for a long time and you probably know more than me about. With that in mind, I hope to throw in a few new ideas and fresh thoughts that'll get you thinking about root cause analysis in a little bit different way than maybe you have before. And for those of you that are on the call that are new to lean or continuous improvement, hopefully we'll give you some ideas of how you can start taking root cause analysis and ingraining it in the culture of your company, which is really the goal of the presentation today. We want to help you find new ways to make root cause analysis part of who you are and how you do business. All right, I'll give you guys a little bit of background about me, not too much to bore you, but I am a lean guy. I fell into Lean and Six Sigma and continuous improvement while working at as a design engineer, manufacturing and designing computer chips. And one day we had a customer call up, which was an automotive customer, and say, hey, we have some problems with one of the components that you're building for us, and we'd like you to put a Six Sigma black belt on that. And you know, we had no idea why they would want to put a karate person on a quality problem. So we had to learn what that was, and I got recruited and trained, and I've been doing it for over 12 years now, and absolutely love helping companies around the world solve problems and make continuous improvement part of their culture. So we're going to try and cram, probably an entire day's worth of training into 45 minutes here. So bear with me. I'm going to move fast. And if you have any questions, again, like Chris said, type them in while you're thinking about it, and we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation. So here's the hypothesis. Every problem that we have, every defect that we see, every issue that comes up in our company can be solved. Okay? But to solve it, you have to understand the process that created it. So, raise of hands, how many of you can solve a Rubik's Cube? If you can, it's because you probably spent a lot of time learning how. So when I was in high school, I was touring around one summer with a marching band that I was a member of, and had a lot of time on the bus, and I had a kid sit next to me, and he taught me how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And there's a process to it. There's a series of steps you can follow, and you can get it right every time. So even though problems may look complex, if you understand the system and the process that created them, you can find a way to get to the root cause and find a solution or a countermeasure that's going to work for you. So if we keep that hypothesis in mind, think about what the problem-solving process is at your company today. Okay? Does it look anything like this? If it does, you're not alone. A lot of the companies that I work with, they're very busy, and firefighting is the norm. It's how they get things done because they're in a fast-paced environment and they need to move on. So I've documented what I think is what most people's problem-solving process is. They see a problem, sound the alarm, start brainstorming, maybe pull a few people together, maybe they're just brainstorming on their own. Then they apply a Band-Aid, a quick fix, and then cross their fingers and hope it doesn't come back. So there's a Japanese saying that says when we kill something, we want it to stay dead. That's what we'd like our problem-solving process to do for us. If we find a problem and we kill it, we'd like it to stay down. So what's preventing us from doing that? What's preventing us from doing real root cause analysis and getting to the heart of the problem? I teach this class all the time in an interactive setting, and I really wish I could have all 229 of you respond to my questions here. But in your minds, think about what's preventing your team or the people that you're working with from doing root cause analysis. Typically, I get responses like, well, we just don't have enough time. Or maybe we're experts. We already know what the answer is. We've seen this problem before. My response to that is usually, if we've seen this problem before, then why are we seeing it again? Typically, companies have no process for problem solving. They have tools, or maybe it just looks too complicated. So how do we take the tools that we have and turn them into an actual problem-solving system? So I was pouring concrete and putting in a basketball hoop for my kids this weekend, and I learned something about concrete. Concrete has great compression strength, but if you try to bend it or flex it, it just cracks and crumbles. It's very brittle. Concrete without rebar in it just doesn't have any real strength. But when you put some rebar in it, a support structure, then it becomes very strong and you can build very large span bridges and amazing buildings out of it. Our root cause problem solving process and system needs to be the same way. If we just give people the tools, if we give them the 5 whys and we train them on 6 M's or Fishbones, that's fantastic. The tools are necessary, but we have to have the surrounding support system in place, or those tools just won't get used, or if they do get used, they won't be used effectively. So how do we turn the tools that we're giving our people into an actual system? So what's the difference between a tool and a system? Well, a system is a series of events and a process and cogs that all work together to get you a result. So if we're going to have a root cause system, we have to take those tools that we have and we have to actually add in a few other things. So problem solving process. We have to give our people a series of steps that they're going to go through every time they find a problem. Metrics. Having metrics in place that actually measure inputs and outputs. Without that, it's very difficult to do root cause problem solving. Leadership follow-up. If we don't have leaders following up on root cause analysis, helping train and mentor our people, we don't really have a system. And finally, change management. So this isn't everything that could comprise a system, but these are additional elements to get you thinking about, okay, we've trained our people, we have some root cause analysis tools, but have we really put the support structure in place around those? Do we really have the problem-solving process? Are our leaders talking about root cause analysis? Are they following up on it? Do we have a change management system in place? If we don't, or if we don't feel we're really mature in those areas, those are opportunities for us to improve and maybe focus on some things other than the tools. So I'm going to give you my 4 steps for root cause analysis. It's the SERUM, and I know it's a terrible acronym, so forgive me, it's all I've got. But we start with the symptom, then we have to gather information, then we have to define the relationship, and then number 4, manage the change. So out of these 4 steps, the 2 that are typically skipped over is number 2, the information step, and number 4, managing the change. So we're going to talk a bit about those today. So starting with the symptom, okay? Anytime we see a problem, we have to understand that what we're looking at is really a symptom of a larger issue. So there's a process deviation or something going wrong with our process that's causing us to see an error, that's causing us to see a defect. So we have to understand that what we're looking at is just a symptom, and we have to dig deeper. So the risk here is that a lot of times we start jumping to conclusions the minute we see a problem, without realizing that we have to look at the broader process and identify what else is going wrong. So here's an example. I took my son up skiing and snowboarding this last winter, and when we got up there, you may not notice it, but those ketchup and mustard colored boots down there are actually a defect. So I had failed to bring his boots, and we had to rent boots, and he was extremely unhappy with me that he had to wear the ketchup and mustard colored boots. So that was the defect. I could jump to conclusions about what really the problem was, but I may not get to the right answer, so we have to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to show you throughout this presentation a real-life example. This is a client that I've worked with in the past, and they manufacture and deliver boots to the U.S. military, and so they've got these hiker boots, and they have to last a year from the time of issue. If they don't last for a year, it's a defect, and the cost is on them. So you can imagine if they get returns, it's very expensive. So they were having a high failure rate on their shoe at a specific point on the shoe, and they needed to do root cause analysis so that they could find a solution, something that was going to fix the problem and prevent them from getting fallout and returns. So when you're looking at this symptom, again, remembering, don't jump to conclusions, just start to understand the situation. So they're inspecting the boot, they're looking at it from the inside, the outside, making notes about what is and is not failing, where the problem is happening, where it's not happening. That takes us right into the second step, is you really need to gather more information to do good root cause analysis. So how do you gather information? What kind of information do you need? The first thing you need to understand is the process. You need to get process data. To get process data, everyone knows or should know that you have to get out of your chair and go walk the process. So a Gemba walk, go following the process step by step, watching it happen, actually doing the work, is a fantastic way to understand what could be going wrong that's causing a problem. Value stream maps and process flows are great. Just don't rely on those alone. Make sure that you actually go walk the process, and then create your updated process flow from that experience. And one thing that's important to remember is I'm going to show you, this is a manufacturing example. If you're from a healthcare environment or some sort of a service environment, one of the clients I work with is a facility services company, and they go around and they clean large buildings and facilities. The same thing applies. If you're having an issue, always go walk the process. If it's an electronic process, you can actually follow the flow of information from system to system, from one person's desk to another person's desk, and understand how the information is being transformed to find out where the problems may be occurring. The second thing you need to do is go gather actual performance data. So this is your quality data. Where's the defect happening? Where are the errors happening? Where's the variation? And there's several tools like using existing data or tick sheets for that. So I'll show you some examples. This is the process flow for the boots. They analyze the process flow and they're looking for, okay, where are opportunities for errors or mistakes or just quality in general to be failing. The second thing they started to do was gather some data on, where exactly are the failures happening and what are the input variables. So how much overlap did they have on the leather? Is the stitching in the right place? How thick was the material? And they're starting to gather that information, and that using the process flow and that performance data together starts to tell the real story of where the root cause might be. Okay? One thing I always prompt people to do is to actually dig deeper. So you have some data, but what's the next level? How much more information could you get if you put some effort into it? In this case, they created a nice little tick sheet. These are the cutouts of the material of the boot, and they wanted people to put ticks on where the issues were happening and write a little explanation, and they gathered that data, and it gave them even more information as to where the root cause could be. So going back to my ski boot example, I went and walked the process and looked at how in the world did I get the wrong ski boots up to the hill, and I looked at my son's and my daughter's ski boots and found out that although different, they look very similar. So walking the process, even in something simple like that, is often very revealing. Helps you understand how you made the mistake or what actually happened. That takes us to the third step of the 4, which is understanding relationships. Some relationships are very easy to understand. If I look at this relationship, I think I got it. I think I understand. If I look at this relationship, it's a little bit more complicated. I'm not really sure what's going on here, but something interesting is going on here. So how do we understand the relationship between our inputs and our outputs? This is similar to, we use correlations, we use cause and effect. If you're a Six Sigma guy or gal, you're using Y as a function of X or your X's. Those are your inputs and your outputs. If you're an engineer like me, you're using regression or a transfer function. Basically what you're trying to do is represent the relationship between what's the symptom you're seeing and the potential root causes using math, right? You should be able to have a mathematical relationship showing the cause and effect. If you can't do that, then you don't really know if you've found root cause, and you're basically just guessing. So how do we find relationships? Well, we start off with some common problem-solving tools. I bet you guys could list all of these, right? 5 Whys, 6 M's, Fishbones, decision trees, value stream map and Pareto's, FMEAs, failure modes and effects analysis, regression, trees, Kepner-Trego. There's lots of common tools, right? But do we really use them? Are they really ingrained in our culture? Sometimes they're not. I have one company that I'm working with, and they're trying to implement a total productive maintenance program, and they're trying to understand why the people don't use the tools. And what I found is that, well, because they already have their 2 favorite tools of choice. So why would they use these when they have their most common problem-solving tools? Number 1 tool, can anybody guess? Experience. I'm an expert. I've done this for 20 years. I've seen this problem before. I already know the answer, right? Second most common tool, brainstorming. We're just going to get in a room and we're going to talk about the problem, and we think it's this, and away we go. What's the problem with that? So here's the problem with being an expert. So one of the companies I worked with in the past internally, we had an adhesive that we were screen printing down onto a circuit board, and basically applying dye to the circuit board and trying to solve a problem of, well, we had some connections that weren't making it. And the experts in the room said, well, it's the way we're putting down the paste. We're not getting enough, and we're doing the wrong speed of putting down the paste, which is getting us the wrong volume. And the experts had a certain idea of what was happening. And so they went and tried it, and the problem didn't go away. So we ended up setting up an experiment where we spread the material down at different speeds, and we snapped it off at different speeds, and we pulled the screen away from the circuit board at different speeds. And you know what we found out? The experts were wrong. It was the exact opposite of what they thought. To get the right amount of volume down, we had to actually set up the screen printer in a different way than what they had normally done. And these guys have been doing it for 20, 30 years. So just because you're the expert doesn't mean you always know the answers. You have to rely on the data. What's the downside of brainstorming? Groupthink. If the group is in the room and somebody throws out an idea, everyone's going to jump on board, and maybe a great idea, it may not. You may get lucky and you may not. Leader think. If there's a leader in the room and they throw out an idea, guess what? That's going to be the best idea in the room because the leader thought of it. And if you don't believe that's true, try to go to a meeting with the senior executive in the room. Everyone's hanging and waiting for what they say, and that's what's going to happen. This can work to your advantage. I actually had an experience where I had a senior leader in the engineering firm walk by a team that was brainstorming a problem, and he walked in the room and actually found the answer that everybody had been working on for 2 hours in about 30 seconds. So it can work, but you got to have the right person and get lucky. Minimal ideas, and you might miss the root cause. Again, two key issues that can really throw you. So I was doing a green belt training with a group of individuals once, and I gave them the problem of world hunger for a root cause analysis exercise. And as a group, they brainstormed and they came up with, well, we need to produce more food. How many of you think that we need to produce more food and that will solve world hunger? So even as a group of really intelligent people, you can come up with the wrong answer with brainstorming. So if you're going to brainstorm, put some structure behind it. Start with some categories like the 8 wastes or the 6 M's. Start in silence. This is the Delphi method so that you don't get groupthink. Let everybody brainstorm as many ideas as they can using that structure of those categories. Push for quantity first, then you can do a group review and look for quality. So if you're going to do brainstorming, at least use some structure around it. But we can do better than that. So 5 whys. Here's the 5 whys that they did for the hiker boot issue. As you can see, they had multiple paths that they tried to go down. They looked for multiple reasons and multiple root causes. This is a good 5 whys because they didn't limit themselves to just one path. They kept probing, they kept digging. Okay? If I asked you to do a 5 whys exercise on something, pick something in your day-to-day life. I usually like to ask people to practice lean and continuous improvement tools using their personal life and experience. And the reason for that is if you can apply it to something in your personal life, it's much easier to translate that into work than to go the other direction. But if you have a problem like, say, you grabbed the wrong ski boots when you took your kids up skiing, you could dig down and get root cause, but there may be multiple root causes, right? If you go just step by step, it's typically not that easy. So 5 whys is great, but you have to go beyond 5 whys because solving problems aren't always that simple. You'll have multiple causes. So one of the things I like to do with people is encourage them to use a 5 whys tree, which is basically taking a symptom, and if you have different paths you can go down multiple paths, because a lot of times a symptom that you're seeing will have multiple issues that are causing it, not just one. Okay. Here's my key warning on 5 whys. Training is not a root cause. So you can take any 5 whys and drill down and get to a point where you say, well, the operator wasn't trained, or that person wasn't trained to do it right. Training is not a root cause. You have to look at what was the process that allowed the individual to make the mistake, and you have to go beyond training. If you land on training as a root cause, go back up, start again, drill down. 6 M's. So for those of you that don't know the 6 M's, there's different variations, by the way, but man, machine, method meaning process, materials, the measurement system, and Mother Nature, which is a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit in those first categories. 6 M's is a great starting point because it forces you to think of one part of the system at a time and drill down into each of those systems. Okay. What you can do now is you can take those 6 M's and put it on a fishbone diagram and start to brainstorm. Again, same principles of brainstorming. Go for quantity first, then go back and review as a team and find out what could really be the root cause in the relationship that you're trying to define. Again, human error is not a root cause. So man or manpower is one of these 6 M's. If you see issues in man or manpower, what should you do? Well, try to transfer those over to the process side. Okay? If I see that a person did something wrong, how can I mistake-proof that process? How can I make that process more intuitive, more visual? If I can do that, then those human errors and human variation can be reduced by changing the process. Another thing I like to encourage my clients and people I work with to do is to combine the tools. So you can take a fishbone diagram, use the 8 wastes as the bones of the fish, and then dig in using the 5 whys. So I find, what's overproduction, what's weighting, what's the, inventory issues that we have. Use the 5 whys after I've brainstormed all of my ideas under each of those categories and drill down to get to root cause. This is really powerful because I've had people that they did a fishbone and they started off, and it wasn't until you pushed them to go farther and dig deeper that they actually found an addressable issue. So you're using all these great tools. How do you know when to stop digging? How do you know when you're there? Some general rules of thumb. If you're drilling down into 5 whys and the root cause gets to where it's just silly, like if the earth didn't exist, this problem wouldn't have happened, that's great. Go up a level. It's probably 1 level up. If the root cause is self-evident, you don't always have to go to 5 whys. You can go to 3. You might have to go to 7. But when you get to a root cause that's evident and actionable, meaning I can do something about that, I can solve that problem, that's where you know you're at a good level for stopping. Okay. Pareto, we brainstormed, we've used some structured brainstorming at this point. Now we're trying to understand what does the data tell us, and does the data validate what our thought process led us to. So Pareto charts are a fantastic tool to use here. FMEAs are also a great tool to keep track of what are the issues that could be causing the problem and what's the risk priority number on that. Here's my warning on FMEAs. How can you reduce the risk priority number on an FMEA? Well, you can increase detectability, right? You can add inspection, find the problem as it's happening. That's fantastic, but it doesn't solve the root cause. So remember, adding inspection is not addressing the root cause. It may make you feel better and may keep, temporarily bad product from going out to your customer, but it doesn't solve the problem. So you found root cause at this point. Now you have to prove it. Okay? So this is how you keep the problems from resurfacing. You have to get to the critical X's. So there's 2 things. There's inputs that are causal and inputs that are controllable. Hopefully you have something that's both. I'll give you an example because they're not the same thing. You can have something that looks like there's correlation, but it's not actually causing the problem. So spurious correlations, and this is just for fun because I had to throw it in here. The number of people who drowned by falling into a swimming pool and the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in. Is there a correlation? Absolutely. Is it causal? Well, maybe after watching a Nicolas Cage film you feel like jumping in a pool. I don't know. Could be. How about the divorce rate in Maine versus the per capita consumption of margarine? Correlation? Pretty strong. Does eating butter make you less likely to get divorced? It could be. Better cooking. So, what's the goal at this point of the root cause analysis process? You have to create a mathematical equation that models the relationship between the processes, inputs and outputs, between the symptom you're seeing and the root cause. If you can't prove it, then you don't know. So this is a project I worked on many years ago where we had the assumption that, we think we're working our people too much, we're doing a lot of overtime, and we think accidents are increasing as a result of that. Do we have any proof? Let's find out. So we plotted it. We did a correlation coefficient. I can't see it on my screen, so let me move it over. And it looks like, yeah, there's a correlation. My p-value is fairly low. There's only a 6% chance that I'm wrong if I say there's a correlation. But what's the problem? Just because you have correlation doesn't mean that your model represents the root cause. So you have to look at your R-squared, specifically your R-squared adjusted, which accounts for additional variation. So in this case, our R-squared adjusted is only 13%, which means our equation, our correlation between overtime and accidents, only accounts for about 13% of the accidents that we're seeing. It's not very good. So we can't say that if we reduce overtime, it's going to reduce accidents. It just doesn't have that big of an effect. Let's look at another one. So I measured my putting skills, and I'm putting from 10 feet away, 20 feet away, and then the idea is that the closer I get to the hole, the better the more accurate my putts will be. So if I look at my p-value, is there a relationship? Yes, absolutely. My p-value is 0.000. That's fantastic. There's a correlation. And my R-squared adjusted, in this case, looks pretty good. I've got 55% of the result that I'm seeing is explained by the model. So about 55% of the variation I see in my putts is due to the distance from the hole, which is great. Does that mean my work is done? If I'm doing root cause analysis, it probably means I have to go dig in and find out what that second bar on the Pareto is. What's the next thing that's also impacting my accuracy that I can go work on? Okay. So is there a silver bullet? Is there one root cause for a problem? Typically not, unless you have an R-squared adjusted that's really large. If you don't, you probably have multiple inputs, variation weights that are causing the symptom you're seeing. So let's go back here to the hiker boot example. So they dug in and they're looking at the samples, and they've got some theories at this point. They're saying, we think we need to have more overlap. We think we need a little bit more material here. Can they prove it? Yes, they can. So they took the information, they did a trial, they changed the two things that they thought were the root cause, and they got different CPKs, different signal levels, and they also, I don't have the slide in here, but they did a t-test, and the t-test validated that the changes they made were actually an improvement. So they also tested to validate their improvement. So this is them testing the strength after the changes. This is a machine that's actually pulling the leather of the boot apart at the stitch. You can see they find out what the force is that they can pull at where it actually breaks, and that's how they measured and proved that they had addressed root cause and actually made a change to the system. So that is the easy part. Getting your teams to start doing and using root cause analysis tools, digging in, using the structure is fantastic. Here's where a lot of companies fall down. After you've performed the root cause analysis, you actually have to change something. So you have to make a change to the process. You have to change the way people do their work. You may have to change equipment, documentation. There's lots of things that will need to be changed. So if change management isn't part of your root cause analysis system, you're going to end up in trouble. You're going to end up solving the same problems over and over again, or thinking you've solved a problem when it really hasn't been solved. So every organization consists of people, and those people have behaviors. And what we're trying to do when we institute change is we're trying to change people's behaviors. So how do we do this? We have to have guts. This is why this presentation is called Fishbones and Guts, because the tools are great, the fishbones are great, but it takes a lot of guts and a lot of leadership to actually do this right. Number one, you have to have the guts to invest. So being proactive in your problem-solving approach takes investment. You have to spend the extra time to do root cause analysis as opposed to just quickly, putting out the fire and moving on. That's an investment and a conscious decision that the leadership of the company has to make. The pay now or pay later approach has to be well understood by people, and this is one of the key, the 4 P's or principles of the Toyota way, right? Long-term thinking. So if you're going to apply long-term thinking, you need to get your people engaged in, okay, we know there's an issue here. We could just go quick and put a Band-Aid on it, but we're going to invest and maybe take the production line down an extra hour, maybe not ship when we said we were going to, and solve the problem now the right way rather than, taking the short-term approach. Having the guts to go beyond training. So does anybody know what the key components of a good control plan? If you're a Six Sigma person, you go to define, measure, analyze, improve, control. When you get to the control phase, what do? Most people say, okay, we implement the changes, we document and train. Fantastic. Is there more to that? Is that really putting controls in place? No, it's not. There's more that we can do. So implementing standard work and visual management is key. Right? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Mistake-proofing the process, also key. How do you make sure that that process can't make that mistake again? Implementing metrics, including leading indicators. We're very good at companies at measuring lagging indicators. Leading indicators are more difficult. They take an investment. Leadership, standard work, and follow-up. So we'll talk about those really briefly here. Having the guts to do it right. If you've put in a Band-Aid like inspection, at this point in the process, you have to rip that off. One of the biggest problems with adding inspection to a process is it never goes away. Once you've added inspection, it stays. Try to get someone to take that inspection point out, and they're like, oh, we can't do that. That's our safety net. So that's non-value added work, and if you're going to streamline your process, you have to get rid of it. You have to have the guts to have standards. So standard work is critical. This is key to the Toyota production system. They implement standards. Everyone follows the standards, and then they do Kaizen. They make process improvements, but they always re-standardize. They establish what the norm is. You have to do that, or you're going to have too much variation in your system. So having good process flows and documentation is great, but you need to have a lot of leadership follow-up to make sure that the standards are followed. Having the guts to make it visual. So visual management goes hand in hand with standard work. Okay. So can you tell the difference between the way it should be and the way it shouldn't be? Can you tell normal from abnormal? 5S, 6S, great tools for making things visual. Having your metrics be visible. So if you look at the board on the left versus the board on the right, if I'm walking past this factory, I can look at the board on the left and know that everything's fine. There's no red, there's no issues. I don't have to talk to those people. Things are cruising, things are good. If I look on the board on the right, I can immediately see there's red on the board. They're missing their goals, something's broken. I'm going to go see if I can help them out, see what they need to get over that problem. Visual management is key to understanding root cause because you can address the root cause immediately when it happens. If there's a lag or a delay between when you see a problem and when you actually go out there to look at what happened, if it's not for till the next day or the next shift or whatever, you're going to miss key information that you could have had if you showed up right away. So having that visual management in place allows you to immediately see problems and go address them. Having the guts to measure your inputs. So if you measure leading indicators, if you identify what those inputs are on your 5 whys, and then you put regular measures in place to measure those inputs, then you don't have the effect of, I found a problem, but I'd never noticed the change in my process that caused it that happened a week ago. Have the guts to be a leader. When I say be a leader, leaders are facilitators. They help people. You have to get out of your chair, get on the production floor, go, or if you're a transactional service process, go out, talk to your staff, work with your people, go side by side with them and do their job with them so that you understand the issues that they're living with, the problems, the things that are making life difficult for them. Remember, lean isn't all about eliminating waste. It's also about eliminating variation, and it's about eliminating overburdening of employees. So if you're not actively looking at those, that last one, overburdening of employees, you're really missing, 1/3 of the part of what lean really is. Having the guts to teach and mentor. A big part of root cause analysis is holding people's hands until they get the hang of it. I've seen it so many times where companies have trained their people to 5S or Fishbones. They're like, hey, it's a really simple tool. Everybody understands it, so they're going to use it. Well, that's just not the case. Most people won't adopt a new tool or a new system until they've used it several times. They feel comfortable with it. They feel comfortable in front of their peers using it. It's not like, well, we're in the room, let's just brainstorm and get out of here. So as a leader, you have to spend and invest the time to lead a few of those sessions, lead some root cause analysis sessions, and help the people understand that this is the expectation. We expect you to use these tools and follow this process. Once you've done that a while, it becomes part of your culture, and then you can take your hands off, let go, and the ship will keep sailing the way it should. 4 steps of training. Make sure you follow these. Show them how to do the task. Do it together. Have them teach it back to you, because you don't truly understand anything until you can teach it back to someone. And then follow up, follow up, follow up. Got to do that last step. Okay. The guts to reward the right behaviors. If we're rewarding firefighting, guess what's going to happen? More firefighting. If we reward the person that took the time to proactively solve a problem and get to root cause, that will start to take hold as well. We have to be careful what we reward in our companies. Okay? And have the guts to change, right? If your problem-solving process and system today isn't working or isn't as mature as you'd like it to be, you got to step outside your comfort zone a little bit, or you're going to end up like Kodak, and that's a place nobody wants to be, right? Guts to be accountable. Holding yourself and others accountable is really difficult if you don't have a culture of accountability right now. Root cause analysis, not going to happen if people aren't held accountable for following the process of truly digging in and doing root cause. And last but not least, making root cause analysis part of your culture means lots of things. It has to be part of your conversations every day, part of your behavior as a leader. There's got to be that belief system in place of long-term thinking. We invest in digging in and finding root cause so that we don't have to solve these problems over and over down the road. We believe that this investment right now is going to save us money in the long run. So, getting to root cause takes guts. Biggest part of this, I think, is leadership, if I were to sum it up. It's all about leadership, understanding, creating what the process is, and then training their people to how to do it so that their people feel confident that they can perform root cause analysis in a way that's going to be effective. Okay? Any problem can be solved just like the Rubik's Cube. Follow the 4 steps: symptom, information, find the relationship, and manage the change. And my final thought that I'd like to leave you with today, be amazing. You were put on this earth to be exceptional, to do more than you think is even capable. I've seen so many great people do amazing things that I just never even thought were possible. So whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in your business, whatever you're doing, don't be afraid to be amazing. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself and challenge other people. That's how we truly show respect for each other. When we say, hey, that's great, what can we do more? How can we go a little bit farther? How can we do a little bit better? If we challenge ourselves, we can accomplish great things, and life will be amazing. That's the fastest root cause analysis training ever. If you'd like a copy of the slides, just email me at cedro@kpifire.com. If you're an ASQ member, you get 10% off KPI Fire Operational Excellence software, which helps you manage your Lean Six Sigma projects and align your projects to your metrics and your goals. So you can go to that link and check that out. And if you have any questions, I think we'll take those now.
All right. Thank you very much.
Too many buttons over there.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. It was really great content, and I think everybody like me got at least a few little nuggets out of that, if not a whole lot of them. So let's go ahead and get to some questions. A couple of the questions that came through were about getting a copy of your slides. So for those of you that asked that question, go ahead if you haven't already and copy down Cedro's email address there. I will also have him send me a copy, so we'll have those available if by chance somebody doesn't have those. Okay, next question. Will you go back to your slide on control and the control plan slide? Robert has a question about that. Okay, Robert, I'm watching for another question to come through, unless you were just wanting something off of the slide in specific. In the meantime, our very first question came through from Larry, and Larry asked if you were familiar with latent cause analysis and how it relates to root cause analysis.
Latent cause analysis. I haven't read anything on latent cause analysis. I can surmise what I think that might be, but I think you probably know more than I do about latent cause analysis.
And Larry,
Are we talking about early life failures and Weeble transformations and things like that?
and Larry, we can wait for a response from you as that comes through. I'm watching here. Um, Michelle has a question. I was hoping that you would kind of hit on it, but the KT
Oh, Kepner
tools.
Trigo.
Yeah, your tools. She just asked what it was, and maybe obviously you can't do a whole class on it, and wouldn't want to. We wouldn't have time. But if you could give her a quick synopsis of what that tool does.
Yeah, Kepner Trigo is a problem-solving. It's really a whole system, and you can get trained and certified to it. You can go to kepner-trigo.com, I believe, is their website. But it's basically some gentleman did some research on all the patents that had ever been issued in the United States, and found that most problems could be solved with similar problems could be solved with similar solutions, and they organize that in a way that's actually really slick. And you can use that tool to solve problems in any industry based on the research that they've done. So yeah, there's a huge body of knowledge on KT, and it's something that again you can get trained, certified to. It's like anything. It's a system, and there's a lot to it, and most people get trained in it, and then they kind of pick and choose the nuggets that they like from it, and use it without using the entire system. But it's certainly worth digging into if you're interested in that. I find it fascinating. I think it's really interesting.
Great. Larry came back to me and gave just a brief explanation. Latent cause analysis believes that everything that goes wrong is caused by people, and you have to work on that, not just the process. You cannot mistake proof all processes if people make mistakes.
Okay. Yeah, there's different theories, and different people teach different things. I would agree with that. You can't mistake proof everything. At some point, we are people, and we have to rely on our skills and our abilities to do things right. And there are cases where an individual can't do a certain job, and it's difficult. So, I would agree with that. If you go back to the Toyota way of thinking, though, you always look for the opportunity to you know help develop your people, right? It's really about putting people first, helping them, you know, learn as much as they can, be as good as they can, and then design processes around our people that are as good as possible. I always think of like an Apple iPhone. It doesn't come with instructions. You get on it and you start using it, and it should be that intuitive. And if we can, I think we can go a long ways as far as making our processes people friendly. Before we just say that's a person issue, let's change the person and fix the problem. I think there's some middle ground there where you can kind of meet both sides, process and people.
Okay, Robert came back to us and was asking for the slide that you have up now, if you could give some examples of leading indicators that you use.
Um, yeah, I mean, a lot of my, well, I'm trying to think of a specific example. If I go back to that hiker boot example, right? One of the things that those guys measure on their, just to stick with that same example since everyone's familiar with it now, one of the things that they measure is, they're looking at stitch width. So they're looking at how far is their stitching away from the edge of their material. There's some room to play in there, so you can actually have variation there without a defect. But if they see that their stitch width is starting to diminish, then they know that eventually they're going to hit a defect. So other leading indicators, like in service industry, that one client I mentioned that is a facility services company, and they go around and they actually clean buildings. They have a system where they clean top to bottom, and they clean clockwise. So you can go and observe the process and watch how many employees are actually following the process. And by observing that as a leading indicator, you can see, well, if they're not following the process, that doesn't necessarily mean that the buildings aren't getting cleaned well, but it's a leading indicator that, without following the process, there's an opportunity for a defect. So whatever your business is, I mean, I'd start with your metrics that you want to drive, quality, cost, whatever those are, and then I'd start to go backwards and say, okay, what drives quality? What are the processes? And then dig into the process and drill down. Okay, what are the steps? So using a decision tree and a process map or value stream map is a really good way to step down through your process and find out the leading indicators that come before the actual error or defect that you might see. Hopefully that answered the question a little bit.
All right. Question from Jeremy. How do you get employees to actually use a red marker and admit that they might not be doing as well as another employee or another shift?
It sounds like a very specific example that you're dealing with right now. Anytime you're trying to get people to highlight when things go wrong, you have to create a safe environment. And one of the best ways that I've seen another leader that I've worked with do this is that he went up in front of a room of people and admitted a mistake that he had made in a previous meeting or something like that in front of everyone, and just threw it out there and said, hey, I completely blew it. And something about the room, something about the atmosphere changed, where all of a sudden the pressure was gone. It was like, oh, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to do something. And I think that's, man, if you want to be a continuous improvement company, you have to create a safe environment where people are willing to try stuff and have it be wrong, because everything is a learning experience. And we talk about in Lean becoming a learning organization. Well, if I do something wrong, Thomas Edison said, I learned 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. We've got to learn, by our mistakes and reward and celebrate people when they make mistakes. Hey, you did that or you didn't do that. Hey, great. If somebody's just not following the process, that's a performance issue, and you deal with that maybe a different way, but always with respect for the individual in mind.
All right, question from Saeed. Is this training should be for leaders? I think that he's asking, should this training be, I don't know, specifically for leaders, if that's what he's asking, or should he get his leaders involved?
Yeah, all of the, when I do a training, I'm typically looking at it from a leadership perspective, because everything, Lean is a leadership tool and a leadership system, and it's on the shoulders of the leadership. So, yes, this is the kind of training that, if leaders want to have their employees do root cause analysis, they need to understand that they have a huge role in that, in establishing the system, training, and helping develop that as part of their culture. So if that's your question, then I guess my answer is absolutely. It really should start with leadership.
All right. Cedro, which audit tools would also work for RCA? Alan.
Oh, man, I love audit tools. My favorite audit tool is working with the people, going to the Gemba and actually working alongside the people. I know that's not a traditional audit tool, but that's in my opinion, the most effective. As far as auditing the process, I think again, standard work and visual management are keys there. If you can make the standard process and the standard work visual, then performing an audit with your standard, checklists and requirements becomes very easy. As a leader, you can walk the process and quickly see if the standards are being followed and perform an audit that way. So maybe not the answer you were looking for, but Gemba walks and standard work are the foundation of being able to do good audits.
All right, next question. How do you handle situations where process data is not available?
Yeah. Go get it. You may have to run the process a little more and gather data. I mean, as you saw in the example in the slides, they put tick sheets out there, they put measurement systems in place. If you don't have process data, which a lot of times you don't, you go find a way to get it. If there is no process data available, then it's really tough to do what I was promoting in the slides, which is you have to prove root cause. And if you don't have data, if the problem goes away, that's one form of proof, but that doesn't guarantee that it won't come back.
I agree. All right, Todd asks, first of all, he states that it was great information, and he says thank you. But his question is how to get momentum when you have less than a skeleton crew. Seems like with too few people for the workload encourages firefighting.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting one of the biggest problems that we run into, particularly with smaller companies. And I work with some smaller companies, and man, they're strapped. They don't have a lot of people, and you come in and you start talking about continuous improvement and doing, job two, which is process improvement. And boy, it's really tough to get those people that are already working 10, 12-hour days to think about that. Two things that I always tell them is, number one, come up with a plan and make the investment. So you have to get over the hump where you streamline some of the processes to make your life easier, so that you can then have the extra bandwidth to do that. So I've worked with companies to help them basically identify what are the two things you could do right now that would really free up your time. Let's go address those problems. Let's stay an extra day. Let's work overtime to solve that problem. And with that extra bandwidth we're going to free up, now we'll have more breathing room to do process improvement. The second thing that I would suggest is start with some basics that are kind of where the rubber meets the road. If you're a small company, you can't implement all the aspects of lean or continuous improvement. Certainly you can't implement a Six Sigma program or anything, like that. Start with something simple like root cause analysis or 6S, or even using a structured problem solving. If you can schedule a half hour of somebody's time once a week to do strategic problem solving, that's a half hour more than you're doing now. And that might be just enough to start the ball rolling. One of the companies that I worked with internally as the lean champion, when I first started there, I actually asked them, I said, hey guys, we're going to do one project per area per quarter. And man, there was a riot. They threw their arms up in the air. They said, there is no way we can do one project per area per quarter. We've been working on these last Six Sigma projects for 9 months. And it made me kind of chuckle, because that's typically how Six Sigma goes, right? Just huge projects that drag on forever. But we worked with them, and we helped them scope their projects down. We helped them learn some basic tools that anyone could use, like mistake proofing and root cause analysis. By the time I left that company, they were doing 5 and 6 projects per quarter per area. And the vast majority of the staff was involved in doing those projects, and it was just part of their life now. They were cranking on it, and the transformation over 3-4 years was just unbelievable to see. So it can happen. Keep the faith, but start small. It's my suggestion.
Okay, so we are at 12:33. I want to give anybody that's willing to stay, provided, Cedro, you've got a few extra minutes. We do have some more questions, but I want to really quickly, I'm going to change the slide share so that you guys can see my screen real quick. I want to give you just a little bit of information for those that have to run. And then what we're going to do is we'll just jump back over to Cedro and we will let him continue.
Yeah, and for those of you that are about to leave, I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me to present. I wish I could have spoken with each of you and talked to you, but yeah, if you have any questions, reach out to me personally, connect with me on LinkedIn, and if you're interested, I'd love to come to your company and see what you guys are up to when it comes to lean and continuous improvement. So thank you again for attending.
Absolutely. Well, real quickly, couple of things. I am Chris Hayes. I am your host as well as the webinar chair, and I appreciate also everybody that was able to attend today. Again, those of you that can stay or would like to stay for questions to finish these up, you are welcome to. Just to introduce the rest of my team so that you have some email addresses and telephone numbers to get a hold of us should you have questions or ideas for topics for upcoming webinars. I would definitely appreciate that. Paul Harbath is our vice chair, and he will be taking over his chair in January. Mike Lopez and Samir Joshi are also committee members, and you've seen both of those on as hosts. Here is the slide for those of you that are asking about where the recordings will be. There's 2 links. This very first one that I'm pointing to is the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division website. The slides will be available there in the library, which you can access on the left-hand side of the page. That will be available usually about 7 to 10 days, but I'll be honest with you, right now headquarters is having a little bit of technical difficulties. The faster way, and hopefully within 4 or 5 days, I will get this recording up on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel when you're on there, what will happen is every month, as soon as I get those webinars up there, we're going to send you not a reminder, but just a status saying, hey, there's a new webinar up there. So you'll get automatic notifications from YouTube on that. So again, those are your two links for the recording. You will get your recertification unit in an email tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to jump back over, give Cedro back the slides and finish up some questions here. All right, next question. How do you overcome a culture of putting a Band-Aid on the problem? I was a QE and 90% of the root cause analysis led to training.
Well, you're not alone. That's been my experience as well. Yeah, cultural change takes time, but you know, the only thing that overcomes that, it's actually one of the steps in the 8D process. If you look at D3, which is actually the fourth D in the 8D process, that's, basically apply a quick fix or a countermeasure. So I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that, but that's usually where people stop, unfortunately. The only way you can do that is two things. You have to have a system, right? So there's got to be a series of steps that everyone's expected to go through. There's got to be a problem-solving process, and part of that process has got to be, finding root cause, implementing true changes, proving you've fixed the problem, and then removing the Band-Aid. If those aren't part of the steps, then obviously there's no process and no one's going to do it. The second thing I would say is leadership, right? If leadership sets that expectation that we're going to go above and beyond Band-Aids, and leadership holds people accountable to that, it'll happen. I mean, people do what their boss asked them to do. I mean, that's how companies work. So if the leadership sets the expectation, it'll happen. And if they don't, then people will take the easiest path, unless they're really passionate about it.
All right, next question. Do you try and get regression data for each potential major cause? What about rare event data? Not very feasible. Alternate suggestions?
Yeah, rare event data is there's some really fancy statistics you can use for early life and failures and rare failure types and things like that. You probably want to if you're trying to use data to validate those, that, like as you pointed out, could be very tricky. So that puts you back into the situation where you almost have no data or nothing reliable. There's no way to show a correlation. In situations like that, if you can't test, meaning you can't change the variable, the input variable, measure the output, and know predictably because it's like a 1 in 1,000 chance that it's going to fail. You really, if you can't do accelerated life testing or anything like that, you're really left with, okay, we think that we found the root cause and we've minimized our risk. And this is where you go into an FMEA where you might actually put a detection process in place or an early detection process, because that's your only choice. You just don't have another option.
All right, a couple of questions one question from a couple of people, I should say. The question is, why is training not considered a root cause?
I guess I would say because training is maybe part of the solution. You always need to train people, but again, training people, you're relying on human behavior to change. And human behavior just doesn't train with a 1 hour training or a process. If somebody's doing a process wrong, you can put them in a room or train them on the job, and that alone, although necessary and needed, so don't get me wrong, you have to do training, but that just won't solve the problem. You have to the reason for training is to change behavior, and to change behavior you have to have continuous follow-up, coaching, mentoring, and hopefully have the behavior you want be the easiest path, the path of least resistance inside a total system or process. So training is part of a complete solution, but I would never say that it's the actual root cause, meaning when I say root cause, I'm thinking if I change that, meaning the root cause, the problem goes away. And I've never seen a problem where I'm like, well, if I just got those people in a room and trained them, the problem would go away. I've just never seen it happen.
And one of the comments or one of the questions about that, Robert actually asks, or he asks about the training not being a root cause and states, what if that person is making continual mistakes, maybe the trainer is not a good teacher. And I, as I read his comment there, kind of goes to exactly what you were saying, is it's not the training. It's not that you didn't provide the training. It's either the format of the training or the teacher or the method or the system that training belongs within, that is a little bit deeper than the training itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would couple training with a lot of leadership follow-up. So, working side by side with that employee for several days, it's an investment, and that's why a lot of people don't do it, because I can train someone in half an hour, but if I'm really going to go work side by side with them and help them do it right and ingrain it into their behavior, that's going to take some of my time, and I just don't have that bandwidth. So, it is possible, but it's an investment.
I agree. Question from Camilla, I think I'm saying that right. Could Gemba walks be incorporated into a control plan? Interesting idea.
Absolutely. So that's that last step in the control plan that I showed where I put leadership follow-up. So and I apologize, some of the words I use in my slides are kind of terms that, have a lot of meaning and need to be talked about. But by leadership follow-up, that's exactly what I mean. A good control plan should have a leadership plan where the leaders are walking the process on a regular basis, working alongside the employees, looking for normal and abnormal conditions in the process, checking standard work. That's what you just said is exactly what leadership standard work and leadership follow-up is all about. Walking the process, going to the gamut.
Okay, David would like you to show the training slide again. Number 1, show the task.
Oh yeah, 4 steps of training. Absolutely.
He didn't ask a question about it, so I think he's maybe making some notes. And David, if you
Perfect.
did have a question about that, go ahead and type that in, and we'll come back to you.
Yeah, those are the 4 steps. I mean, show them, do it together, have them teach it back. Having people teach stuff back, it's kind of uncomfortable and awkward if you're not used to doing it. I used to do in my leadership standard work, my Gemba walks, I would go up to people. We used to train people, and we do a training of the month. So once a month, we train them to a lean tool or a lean principle. And then what I do is I go walk around the building and I stop and talk to people and I say, hey, did you get the training of the month last month? They're like, yeah, I got it. What was it on? Oh, it was on overproduction. Great. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what the training was about. And if they can teach it back to me, then I know the training was effective. I know it sunk in. If they're like, well, I went, but yeah, I don't really remember. And if they can't teach it back to me, then I know our training wasn't effective. I know we're not applying it in a way that's meaningful. So if you're training people and it's not sinking in and they're not applying it, or there's no system for them to use the training in, then that training is waste, right? It's non-value added work. It's taking time and resources and it's not producing a result. So anytime we're doing activity that's not producing a result, it's waste. We don't want to do that. So having them teach it back, go talk to people. Say, hey, tell me about standard work. Tell me about root cause analysis. See what they have to say.
All right, we're getting down to the last few. Joe wants to know what R-square number you would consider to be significant.
Boy, I don't think there is such a thing as a threshold or a rule of thumb. I'm sure there is. There's probably a stats book out there with a rule of thumb, but R squared adjusted is really just telling you what percentage of the variation that you see can be predicted by your model. So I mean, in a perfect world, you'd have an R squared of 100%, which means your model represents 100%. You plug in your numbers, and it gives you your output. I like coupling the R squared analysis with a Pareto because you can look at, okay, input number 1, X number 1 accounts for 50% of the variation. X number 2 accounts for another 20% of the variation. X number 3 is now 5% of the variation. And then you maybe have like a really long tail. But if I know that I'm getting the biggest ones, like the one that's accounting for at least 50% of the variation, then I know that at least I'm working on a root cause that's going to have an impact. If you're working on something with an R squared of 10% or 5%, you're probably investing time into an input variable that isn't going to have a big impact on your output.
Okay, how do you encourage team members to combat groupthink and leaderthink? Liz asks.
Leader think is easy. Kick the leader out of the room. I've done it numerous times. You
Yeah.
just ask the leader to leave and get people talking. Groupthink, again, the steps to brainstorming that I put on there is having people start in silence and put as many ideas on sticky notes as they can, typical affinity diagram exercise. Um, if people are brainstorming in silence and they're encouraged to go for quantity, like you give them a minimum, say, hey, you have to come up with at least 10 ideas, right? You've kind of forced people to go beyond the obvious thing that they think at first. That's a great way to just kind of start the conversation without starting groupthink.
Perfect. And what would be the best method to overcome acceptable and bring in excellence using RCA?
Going from good to great. Um, wow. So good behavior. Employee on the line sees a problem, they stop the line, they tell their manager, and their manager helps them solve the problem. Great behavior. Employee sees a problem on the line, stops the line, pulls their team together, pulls up the last value stream map and root cause analysis they did, does a root cause analysis as a team, and solves the problem, and their manager finds out about it 2 minutes later when they've already solved it. That transition from good to great is the constant battle that you're fighting with lean. I wish there was a short answer for that. That's culture change that we're talking about. Getting people to go beyond band-aids and beyond that. One thing I will say, setting high expectations. Push, tell people you expect excellence, and when they come to you with anything less, say, hey, I really appreciate the hard work you put into this. How can we go farther? How can we do better? If that's part of your conversation as a leader, eventually it will become part of your culture. But culture change requires consistency, which means we have to have that conversation all the time. It can't just be a one-time thing. So that was a terrible answer to your question, by the way. I apologize for that. But I don't think there's a quick answer to that one.
Some questions are easier to answer than others. All right, we're down to our last one. In many cases, process owners are reluctant to collect process performance data because of the cost, time, and effort. How can we better convince them of the value of data collection?
um, I think the answer is in the last sentence there. You convince them by doing it once or twice. A lot of companies, what they'll do is they'll do like a pilot program, or they'll pick one specific area or problem in their company where they're going to focus, and they'll do a really good job solving that problem and using the tools and using data, and then they'll showcase that to the rest of the organization. And when other people see that, oh, it wasn't that bad, and wow, they got a really great result, then you start to get pull instead of push. Then people start asking you, oh, how do we do that? I want to do that in my group. So yeah, if you can start to create pull in the organization by doing a couple of examples of where it worked out really well. Again, starting small problem in one area and using the tools and the approach, that can start to create the momentum and get the ball rolling for you. So yeah, that's just one way to do it, but the other way is to make collecting the data easier. Automate it. When you ask people to collect data for you, say, look, this is only for 2 days or only for a week. Let them know there's an end in sight. They'll be a little bit more willing. And then I guess the third thing is have everybody have common goals. If we're all aligned on our goals and we have the same objectives, it's easier to trudge through data collection and analysis than if we don't know what the end is. So begin with the end in mind, start with the end goal, and makes life a little easier.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again very much. Thank you, everybody who stayed on the call and everybody that joined in the first place. I appreciate the support for the webinar series. We have next month's coming up. Cedro, thank you so much. This was really great information. Another really great webinar from ASQ Lean Enterprise Division. Thanks, folks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.